Support.
And support. Approve the minutes of February 6th. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is general public comment. This is an opportunity to have questions or concerns concerning non-public hearing items and issues not on the agenda. Speakers are asked to identify themselves by name and address and have up to 5 minutes to offer your comment. Is there anyone wishing to come forward to offer comments? Okay, there being none, we'll move to the first project review. This is case number 19-825, Richmond Farms, Richmond Land, LLC. It's Richmond Farms Phase 1 Final Preliminary Plat Request. This is a public hearing, and we'll start off with an introduction of the project by Dan Power, the Planning Director.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks to most of you in the audience who you're probably here to hear about this case, I'm guessing, the majority of you. So I'm sure the Planning Commission would be glad to take some public comments if you have any new items from the last time or you didn't make the last meeting. But typically we'll go through some of the background of this case and talk about what specifically we're taking action on tonight and some technical details that the staff picked up on when we were reviewing this. And then you can ask for the applicant to make some comments and open up the public hearing. So I'll take the lead here and then we'll get into comments from others. So on November 7th, maybe some of you were in the room, there was a plan proposed for a 22 lot platted subdivision phase within this broader roughly 267 acre parcel that is called the overarching Richmond Farms project, which that overall parcel has been split into two halves now. Within those two halves, we're looking at the southern end where there's a proposed street connection to Mullins at Richmond, and there's these 22 single-family platted residential lots proposed. So what we like to refer to this as is kind of a one-dimensional and two-dimensional review, two-dimensional and three-dimensional review. So back in November, we looked at what we'd call a two-dimensional review. We had layout that we discussed, some overarching traffic generation and broader planning discussion items that we went over. This is the part of the project where there's been some more detailed design completed for the project. We get into what we call three-dimensional design, which is more grading detail. What are the specific elevation points where you have water draining from point A to point B? What are the contours that are proposed? So the contours of the land at 1 foot intervals to show that the project site is going to drain appropriately. What are the details of the road construction? All these details come together at this stage before we get into what's called a pre-construction process for the road to be built for this leg of the project. So this is kind of the Planning Commission's last shot at looking at a detailed set of plans for the project. So that's why it's a little bit of a bigger plan set than you saw last time. There are, as I said, contour lines and some more grading detail on these plans than you saw before. Drainage easements are now shown and more dimensions are shown on this set of plans. So we're in that step 2 of 3. The third step is after the road is completed before buildings are built. There's a acceptance of the public road into the City of Walker's road system, and then once that's all buttoned up through a formal plat that's surveyed and then submitted to the state of Michigan, that plat gets accepted by the City of Walker's City Commission, and homes can finally be built there. So we're ways out from that. You're going to see the entire road be constructed before you see any homes go up if this gets approved. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself in talking about the approval, but that's just to frame up kind of the typical process. We look at the layout in 2 dimensions, the 3-dimensional aspect, and then the road gets built and then the homes get built. I'm going to skip back a couple of slides here because I do want to show this is kind of what the plans look like. We can zero in on any of these. I have the full copy of the full plan set up here that the applicant can refer to if they want to go over any of the technical details, if you have questions on those, or the folks in the audience have questions on those. And that's the 22 lot stretch nearest to Richmond. In the grand scheme of things, the 267 acre parcel that's part of this kind of related to this project was split in half, as I said, and so now the Richmond Farms piece, the specific development, is on the southern half, and you see a preliminary layout of how this will tie into the neighboring properties, consistent with the current zoning that's in place. So we have kind of different shades of yellow zoning, which are your single-family residential zoning districts. You have 3 defined plat phases with 2 roads connecting to the south and 1 connecting out to the east. And then you have some future development areas that will continue to connect into that network. This is what the site looks like now from Richmond Street, or I say now, but this was actually taken last fall. So it looks a lot more covered with snow right now. Getting back into kind of the comprehensive planning aspect of this, as I said, the point of the Planning Commission's review tonight is really just to verify whether those design details, those grading details, stormwater road layout are consistent with the zoning and adhere to engineering standards. But we don't want to lose sight of the big picture at the same time. There was a lot of concern and commentary during the first review about how this project, with this scale of land being developed, how it's going to plug in to the surrounding street network, how it's going to fit with the community fabric. So we want to think big picture in terms of what are the future land uses that we could see growing up along this corridor. One of the other big concerns was that we do have a potential future street that connects somehow to 3 Mile Road. We don't know exactly how that's going to look right now, but it was evident that this was a really important connection to make from a planning standpoint. And there were a lot of comments about this during our first review in November, and staff, the applicant, city commissioners, planning commissioners, in response to those comments, wanted to make sure that we were tracking towards that goal. So what we've said is that prior to future phases of this project being built, let's get what we call a precise plat in place. And a precise plat, as the Planning Commission knows from recent projects, is a legal description for a center line of a road right-of-way that gets put into the zoning ordinance. So it verifies that you're going to have a public road right-of-way that connects from point A to point B in the future. That dashed line, as it looks on this image, can be altered in the future depending on the development that occurs, but we want to give our best guess at the most feasible option for connecting this road through, and that's the purpose of the precise plat that we're going to ask to be recommended as a condition prior to the phase 2 project coming together. Beyond that, we don't know exactly what the future land use is going to look like here. You can see a dash line on this image toward the top of the screen that is cutting across the site west to east or east to west, and that's the old railroad right away. That's kind of your boundary line. You can see it on the map there. You see farmland to the south, industrial to the north. That might be a point where you see transition of land uses. So you might see more single-family residential farther south end of the project area, different types of uses leading up to the industrial on 3 Mile, consistent with the planning intent of what the Planning Commission wants to see there. So we're going to have some good discussions about that moving forward. And currently it just looks like yellow south of that line and gray north of that line. So in other words, single-family residential to the south, industrial to the north. There may be some creativity in there and flexibility depending on what the land actually allows for and how those transitions actually look when you're consider yourself to be driving or walking from your residential home site along that road connection to the north. The land uses that lead you from point A to point B may change, and we'll have to have a good discussion about that. But for right now, we know that that southern edge of the project is going to be single-family residential. So getting back into the details, like I said, one of the big things we look at in this stage of the project is grading details. There's now a topographic grading plan submitted with your plan set. This is a really crude interpretation, which is similar to the kind of thing I do for mineral mining. proposals, you look at kind of the high points being yellow, the low points being green in terms of at least where water flows over land. Keep in mind there's also pipes conveying water through drainage easements underground, but this is the basic shape of the land when the roads are built. You're going to have the high point kind of in the middle of that stretch of road. You're going to have the detention basin to the southeast closer to Richmond. And then on a site-by-site basis, you want to make sure that each site accounts for its grading and drainage details too. So what we ask for prior to buildings being built on these 22 home sites is a more detailed individual grading plan that's kind of a cut and paste from this overall grading plan that shows the minimum bottom open elevation of that home has to be a certain level so it doesn't flood itself. At the same time, it can't be so high that its driveway is pitched too steeply and sloughs water off onto the neighboring properties. So it's a fine balance, and the individual grading plan sheet helps the builders to meet that balance. Another thing to keep in mind, we pay closer and closer attention to drainage easements and the way they impact items that folks like to have on their properties, and vice versa, the way that those items impact the drain easements. So we encourage the developer to have some sort of a reference built into the restrictions for the plat that shows what our local rules are pertaining to things that you cannot install in drainage easements. So you can't have sheds, pools, fences cutting through a drain easement in certain ways. But that leads to another point, and this image is a little hard to read, I realize looking back at it, but what we often run into is that you'll have a drainage easement that crosses two property lines. In doing so, you're limiting the area on a yard for any individual home site that can be built on. You're restricting the area you can enclose in a fence perimeter because you can't have that fence cross a drain easement. So what we've asked for, the city engineer has really pushed for, is a different type of drainage easement layout that moves the entirety of drainage easements where possible onto one site or another, so that instead of having two sites have to be restricted, you can instead have the fencing kind of cross over the whole thing with a swinging gate, and then you have your fence line the perimeter still. So I think this is a really good idea, and it might take a little bit of reassessing our codes and making sure that we're set up to allow for this, but we've asked this project to move ahead with that type of drainage configuration with the hope that it's going to free up some land and minimize those conflicts where you have people potentially breaking the rules, building stuff in the drain easements, and compromising the drainage in the area. Just make it easier to comply, and that should happen less. So that's being addressed with this set of plans. And then there are other details that relate to what you want to see prior to construction that show up as conditions here. So I'm getting right to my recommendations slide here. Going to kind of jump around, but my recommendations are to follow the city engineer's recommendations. Also, that this precise plat has to be adopted prior to the initiation of the second phase, so that road legal description, a 3 mile. That some basic benchmark grading information should appear on a set of individual grading plan sheets. So we're talking about the minimum bottom open elevations, unit types, rules from our code that regulate how steep your driveway can be and how much side slope drainage you can have. Submit a plat restrictions document prior to the final plat approval. Street tree escrow payment should be made because that pertains to the fact that we facilitate the street tree plantings in platted projects and Walker, so we make sure that trees are planted to a certain standard and caliper. There are some previous traffic improvement recommendations that I think we're still making here, which are that the westbound right turn deceleration lane on Richmond Street at Mullins should be completed, and the addition of a center left turn lane on Richmond at Mullins should be completed. And then prior to home construction, that highway permits from the Walker DPW are secured. Finally, if this is approved tonight, that there's a step of review with the City Commission where we have 10 copies of the plans you're looking at go to the City Commission for their consideration for approval. So that summarizes where my thoughts are at this stage in the process. I'll leave the plan image up here and have the full set on the overhead if we want to refer to that as well.
Dan's doing such a good job on these reports, I wonder sometimes if I'm really needed here for anything more than questions. But just to highlight the stuff that I had, the contour plan changed over the last submittal. I know that there's a lot of folks from the audience, from the neighborhood that are watching this and saying, hey, what's going on with this? I just kind of want to point that out as something that we'll work through. We're not sure which plan is the accurate and most current plan, but we'll figure that out as we move forward. The developer has proposed to adjust their detention pond design to include possibly 3 different phases. And I think as they looked at this before and they said 416 units, how big's the pond got to be? That's where they started. It's not necessarily realistic to have to build all that at once. So we're okay with that. We think if we let them build the pond for phases 1, 2, and 3, that'll get them down the road a little ways. When phase 4 comes in, they'll have to reevaluate whether they do another cell or complete the pond at that time. But that seems realistic. The traffic study recommendations that we wrote about in our last report should all be valid, and Dan covered those. I think the one that wasn't covered there was that for phase 3, we want to see the turn lane on Richmond at Elm Ridge. So that's a future recommendation, something that would be triggered a little bit later. But you know, with our short report here, we don't want to lose sight of those traffic recommendations. And then one other item that came up during some public comment last time and was talked about a little bit more was the fact that Mullins Avenue through this development really needs to be 36 feet wide and not your typical minimum 30 feet that we'd see in a plat. It's going to serve as the backbone for this development. It's going to be part of the precise plat that Dan mentioned that would go all the way up to Keyline Drive. So we believe it should be 36 to allow for a center turn lane in the future. So if it does get a little bit busy, people can still get in and out safely. Makes a whole lot of sense. And then lastly, if there's any changes, and I think Dan mentioned this too, the property's been split in half since we first talked about this many years ago. If there are changes on the density or the use, if they switch to apartments or condos or anything like that, it really it triggers a revisit of the traffic study. You know, then it would be time to take another look at that, and hopefully by then we'd have some better data too about the first few phases. So that's it for us.
With a 36-foot pavement width, what's generally taking place? You've got 2 lanes of traffic. Is that anticipating as well on-street parking, both sides?
It does. It generally looks at 12-foot center turn lane and two 12-foot through lanes. We can adjust that a little bit here and there, but it does not typically account for on-street parking. So that main road in the future, you know, parking could be prohibited there.
Okay. On the other hand, if you're looking at the local streets that would spine off from that, those would be, what would be the cross-section there?
Generally 30 feet with just 2 lanes, usually no center line striping. So it's a little bit more of a free-for-all. You can park on those streets. We generally don't restrict one side or the other in our neighborhoods because we don't have that many cars parking on the street. But that's been something that's been discussed in some of the more dense neighborhoods too.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I forgot to press the button.
Scott, what about lot number 1? Would that have to go out onto Richmond, or would that still go out onto Mullins? I mean, the driveway right there with if there's a center turn lane, you know, that kind of thing?
I think technically it could go out onto either. Okay. We haven't really debated the merits of that lot. We have talked about the other 4 around the intersection there quite a bit, and the developers made some adjustments to the plan to account for that. But the one that's on Richmond, we haven't discussed in any detail.
Okay. Also, has there ever been talk on Richmond of lowering the speed limit up to that intersection? Yeah. Right now I think it's at 40.
I think you're familiar, the Planning Commission at least is familiar with the speed limit law that we've been wrestling with.
I know.
We don't have the freedom to change these unless the vehicles themselves change their speeds.
I didn't know if the traffic study at all would necessitate that.
We can look at it, but oftentimes if we go do a traffic study, we don't get good news, we get bad news. And that makes us look at, does the speed limit even have to go up higher? Because we're supposed to determine the speed of 85% of the vehicles and set the speed limit such that 85% of the vehicles are traveling at or below that limit. That means almost everything goes up.
Gotcha.
So we try to err down as much as we can, but you know, in some cases the best thing that we can do is if not go do that study if we don't want that bad news.
Okay.
So there's no plan for it. That doesn't mean we can't do it, and we can do it, but there's a caution there.
And then my last question on the intersection. I've seen other intersections that have come out of developments where, you know, they've turned them into four-way stops. So that way the traffic can move. I mean, it slows down Richmond, but it allows people at least to get out of that development easier. I don't know if it's something maybe long-term, maybe in phase 3.
Yeah, that's a long-term thing to look at. You know, right now, it's hard to tell,
Yeah,
but if there's
okay.
400 units back there and 200 of them use this route, that's a
Right.
lot of cars, and, you know, it might be worth considering that at some future point.
Okay, thanks.
I just wanted to jump in and, because Commissioner Laurie called out one specific lot, and I forgot, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention something else about one lot. Lot 22, I believe it is the one southeast of the two proposed streets there, or on this screen, it's the one on the upper right. That has changed. There used to be a proposed kind of common open space or park area that was going to be commonly owned by a homeowners association in this project. That's no longer the case. That lot by Richmond and Mullins is now going to be kind of taken out of the plat and absorbed with the adjacent property. So it's not going to be a formal parkway or a formal park space.
Anything else? Okay. We'll provide an opportunity now for a representative of the JAG Development to offer any comments on the project. And please give your name, address, and your affiliation.
Sure.
Thank you.
Todd Grass, Mojave Development. I'm the president. The developer. So since last time, we've worked a lot with staff and took a lot of the considerations and recommendations into play here. The precise plat, the definition has been given. I think last time we said we're open to it. We've left room for it. We understand that's a critical element, so we came ahead with the precise plat definition. I think according to Scott's sort of the line that he had come up with. So that's in the city staff's hands, and we're prepared to file that. That's not a problem. I think when we were talking about the contours, I believe that there were just a couple maps that were switched from the previous submission. So I think the documents that were sent, the last documents were all the most recent versions. There were just a couple pages that have been switched around, so that should be fine. The easements and the discussions about the drainage easements, we've taken those recommendations into play here. We've put them in so that they're only dealing with one lot in most cases, or it's gone off the lot onto what will be the neighboring lots. So that's been put into place. We've extended Mullins to 36-foot wide. And where you're dealing with the Mullins intersection there, the first one, we've addressed that until houses, or until the side streets are developed. There would not be driveways for those corner lots on the side streets. They'd have to come on Mullins. That's just to help the city with clearing roads and snow and that kind of thing. Other than that, I think we've been pretty responsive working with the city and the recommendations. And I hope it's working for you guys.
Thank you. And any other questions of the applicant at this point? Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
At this point, this is a public hearing, so do we have a motion to open?
I make a motion.
We've got a motion seconded to open the public hearing. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. The public hearing is open. You in the audience are able to come up. Again, identify yourself by name and address and offer your comments. In the interest of time, if we can limit the commentary to no more than 5 minutes per speaker, we'd appreciate it.
Just turn on the green light when I have to stop talking, okay? Bruce DeWitt, 2428 Elmridge. I want to thank you guys and thank the developer for taking care of a lot of the concerns that I had and a lot of the other members had or citizens had about this parcel. I'm glad about the change of the 36-foot Mullins Street. I'm glad to see the street going all the way through. There's only two things, and this is probably future, is I'm not sure that if you put that through street in, is that turn on Elmridge going to be necessary? I'm assuming that once this through street goes in, traffic on Elmridge will decrease. I mean, it doesn't bother me one way or the other, but I just don't think it's going to be necessary and something that I might want to take a look at. And my other question is the property has now been divided into two parcels, the north and south. And we've seen the kind of the plot of the parcel 1, and then parcel 2 would be the one behind it, and parcel 3, I guess, is the industrial that's possibly on the other side of the railroad tracks. My question is I'm kind of hoping that through street is actually done on the next phase of parcel 1, because it'd be kind of nice if all that traffic from the construction and whatnot could actually head out through Keyline and onto 3 Mile instead of having that next whole set of houses or development all happen before that through street is in there. That would relieve a lot of the construction traffic on Elmridge, on Richmond. Well, I guess traffic can't go on Elmridge, but on truck traffic can't go on Elmridge, but on Richmond, Mullins, and all the other streets. But for the rest, I'm really happy on how they revised the plan, and I'd like to see it move forward. And 22 homes ain't too bad.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to come forward?
Hello there. I'm
Hi.
Cindy Point. I live at 2099 Lamont Court. And I just wondered if someone could speak to the timing. I know these projects sometimes feel like they go fast, and sometimes the groundwork takes forever and it seems like nothing's getting done. So kind of when would we see construction on the road begin? And I know you don't know certainly to a month or a date, but just in broad terms, when would phase 1 be done? One concern I have is you have 22 homes for phase 1, but then it looks like you have 37 for phase 2, which brings us up to 59. So now we have 59 homes, but still the only entrance and exit would be on Mullins, and then it looks like perhaps up and down Pheasant. So I know, like the gentleman before me just talked about what the timing is for that road possibly going to 3 Mile. You know, Elmridge and Richmond, it's tough there. And Elmridge and 3 Mile go there between 7:15 and 8:15 in the morning. You've got Walker Charter kids, you've got, you know, businesses, people going to and from work. There's no light there. Good luck turning left. And I think those are real practical traffic considerations that you should you know, on the front end plan for. I feel like this great big giant project is being broken down into smaller and smaller phases. I think this is the 3rd meeting I've been to, and now the drainage stuff is getting smaller. So you don't want to build the whole thing. We'll just build it for these first 3 phases. And I understand the practicality of that, but sort of the fear in the back of my head is that you are going to make these little bites for the elephant, and all of a sudden we're going to realize, oh, we went too far and we didn't really plan this well. And the one picture you had up with the yellow for the height elevation and then the green for the low part of the elevation, you know, we're on Lamont Court, so that's really close to us. And I think of the other day, you know, the other week when we lost our power, and I know of people that didn't have backup sump pumps, and you know, here we are in January, but the water's coming in, but it hasn't frozen enough, and there were some flooded basements, and that's just with our normal topography. You know, we're on clay, we know there's water, we always deal with water. We have a sump pump, a backup sump pump, a 3rd pump we can put in, and a generator, because we know the consequence of it. And sort of, again, the fear is that you're gonna build something high that's going to be kind of coming our way, and if you don't get it right, you know, we're going to be the ones dealing with the consequence. So again, traffic, figuring out your roads in and out, certainly, and I know we'll meet again before phase 2 starts, but just so you on the front end can kind of have that as a part of your discussion on the front end would be good. So if you could speak to the timing, when will we see the first house start to be built? You know, that would be good. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess that question on when that first phase might break ground is to some extent the developer, to the extent that he's had good conversations with his civil engineer and city staff on how long it might take to get to that point.
Presuming you want me to come up and answer it.
Yes, please.
I would say it depends on approval, but as soon as everything's approved, we'll bid it out. If the bids come in where we anticipate them coming in, we anticipate moving forward. So I'd like to say 2019.
Okay.
If everything works. If it doesn't, well, I might get 2020.
Okay.
Really depends on how quick the approval process goes.
All right. Thank you.
How long does it take to build a road? I'm just curious. Before you can
Any other comments?
Jack Wysocki, 2107 Lamont Court. I'm not gonna take that long, but I just want to reiterate the fact about the drainage behind our house on Lamont Court and how that retention pond is going to be built, because all the drainage from that street goes in towards our back, and then there's another exit to the west into the field, which is where I'm just curious on how that's going to be done. And also, as Scott had mentioned about the future phases and the future development of Richmond, or of that thing, I think some concern has to be done regarding Richmond Street between Mullins and Elmridge, based on, I think that road does need to be redone and put curbs in and stuff, just for future flow of drainage, because you're going to get more traffic on that road now, and then there's really no sidewalks. I mean, there's no curbs, and that street does need to be improved if you're going to make the road a little wider at Mullins, and then the future of Elmridge there, right at the corner.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? There being none, entertain a motion.
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Support.
Motion supported to close the public hearing. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. We've gotten some comments from staff, from the applicant, and from the neighbors here. And we've had a chance to take a look at information in the packet. Any comments on this issue?
I can make one. I think that I would say that I really appreciate the work the developers have done to get to a point where we are much more comfortable, I think, with the look of what we've got so far. I feel pretty good about phase one. I think everyone here seems to be pretty palatable to what's proposed, and I think the other challenges we'll work through as we move forward with the project, but I think the 22 lots we're looking at tonight, I'm pretty comfortable with.
Mr. Chair, in regards to some of the drainage questions that came up, I'm not sure if Scott wants to address any of them, but in general, it's been looked at very seriously, and he pays a lot of attention to where the drainage is going, in addition to if it were to go off-site.
You're giving
So
me
I'm
way
just
too much
making
credit.
a comment on that.
You're giving me way too much credit too early. We haven't seen any of the real grading plans for the next few phases, but I can assure you that, at that point, there will be a rigorous process that they'll have to go through, and you'll get to see the grading for that as well. One thing we haven't talked a lot about is that I remember something from Lamont Court, where the drainage there, because it was also a Goodale project at the time, that drainage was supposed to be combined at some point with this other drainage. So that'll be something that we'll look at in future phases to see if that needs to be routed through this pond. But it's very, very wet back there, and we've got some stories. Our old building inspector lived back there, and he tells a story about how he went back, and then there was a lot that was basically a swamp, and he dug down 10 feet, and all the water went right down into the sand, and he was able to get a lot of that water out of there in his little area, but there's just a lot of perched water on top of clay out there, so it's tough.
One minor thing to add, at this stage in the review process, we always require that the pertinent agencies outside of the city of Walker weigh in and give their approval. So there are letters in your packet from the Kent County Drain Commission, Kent County Plat Board, and a letter from the DEQ that basically says this does not affect any, I don't know the exact term, but regulated waterways of the state. I think they don't have any purview over this particular phase of the project. So there's letters from all those agencies in your packet.
Thank you, Dan. Well, are we at a point to offer a motion on the project at hand?
I think so. For case 19-825, I will make a motion to recommend approval to the Walker City Commission for the proposed 22 lot final preliminary plat based on the plan revision dated 2/7/2019 and supporting application material for the proposed project at 3487 Richmond Street Northwest, as it does meet the standards set forth in the City of Walker Subdivision Regulation Ordinance. Conditions of the final preliminary plat approval. The applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the planning director's letter dated 2/13/2019. The applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the city engineer's letter dated 2/13/2019. Findings of fact, the 22 proposed single-family residential lots meet the dimensional requirements of the Walker zoning ordinance. And per this conditional approval, the engineering and infrastructure details meet the standards of Articles 2 and 4 of Chapter 74 of the Walker Subdivisions Code.
We've got a motion and support to conditionally approve the final preliminary plat for Richmond Farms number 1. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is case number 18-803, subplan number 5, future land use plan. It's a public hearing. Looking at reviewing a draft of the Walker plan that will be portrayed on the screen at hand. And it'll deal with recommendations for road connections, land use, and traffic planning from Alpine Avenue to Walker, adjacent to Clute and Panel Street. Dan?
All right, I saw that our assistant city manager had the same number of slides 2 weeks ago, and he made his talk go pretty quickly, so I'll try to replicate that. Feel free to stop me if you see details on the slides or you want to talk about details in this plan document, but I will talk about this at a pretty high level. We've had 3 other public meetings about this part of Walker, and this is just kind of the culmination of those discussions into a plan document. So maybe some folks from the Clute and Panel area are in the audience and can certainly weigh in. This is a public hearing to review the draft subplan for what we call subplan number 5. So if you recall, there are 5 and a growing number of neighborhoods in Walker that the city over the years has identified as sort of neighborhood level planning focus areas. This number 5 area grew out of the planning discussions revolving around having a kind of bypass industrial street connection from Alpine Avenue all the way to Walker, in a way that is sensitive to all the other land uses in that area, and which had grown into a recommendation for what was called an essential street connection from Clute Street. That essential street connection has morphed into different discussions over the years and has gone away in this document, for lack of a better term. In its place, we've looked at other alternatives for potential future connections, and that's part of what this plan is about. So the plan also involves revisiting future land use in the focus area that we've been looking at. So this is the public hearing to review the final draft plan document. We'll certainly take public comments, and the Planning Commission can either approve, table, or deny the consideration of this document. And I think, like Frank said a couple weeks ago, it'd be preferable to get a tabling and some recommendations for other things to consider rather than just shelving it because of, I think, the work that you folks put into it. So just to note, I've had some conversations kind of as part of other master planning discussion. I haven't had any specific written comments during the review period. But let's just revisit kind of where we've started and where we've zoomed into in this plan document. So here's the original study area. We were looking at the connectivity of the road network all the way from I-96 and Walker all the way down to Panel Street and Alpine Avenue. Looked at current zoning, current planned land use. So zoning, again, is the set of rules that currently apply to how those properties can be used. Planned land use is the type of land use that you want to see those properties evolve into if there are ever rezonings, and kind of the vision that you want to see for those properties in the future. I'm calling this the specific focus area within that big picture because this is a really, really huge swath of Walker, and what we're talking about in this plan relates to this whole coverage area. But what we really got into detail on was kind of this, what I call specific focus area. And there's a little blip down there outside of Walker's city limits at Alpine and Panel in the city of Grand Rapids, in addition to basically properties that have frontage on Panel Street or Clute Street or Walker Avenue between the city limits of Grand Rapids and the Coopersville and Martin Railroad to the north. So looking at that specific focus area, we got down into what we call focus elements. So there were 3 different topics of discussion. We looked at the railroad bridge on Walker Avenue. We looked at the Panel and Alpine intersection, at least from a advisory level, because again, that's in the city of Grand Rapids. And then we looked at the site where there had been this essential street connection plan from Clute to Walker that we wanted to revisit as Betts Industries began talking about their growth and a potential private road network they were looking at constructing, which is now moving along through their earthwork and construction process. So what do we do with this piece of land, and how might we have industrial connectivity in the future? The first focus element, just after this draft plan was released, we did secure the Type A TDEDF grant from MDOT for this at-grade crossing. So this is in motion. We have to, I think, strategize how this is going to be executed, and this proof of concept drawing may change here and there as the road design actually comes together, but this is the concept that was approved. So we will, if this grant comes to fruition, see that at-grade crossing, which should improve road safety, visibility, and the movement of traffic on Walker toward 3 Mile and eventually the interchange with I-96. So that was low-hanging fruit one. In the grand scheme of things, a pretty tangible improvement, and we can check the box on that already being pursued. We also looked at this difficult intersection of Panel and Alpine Avenue. There's really no easy fix here. There are a number of possible solutions, including perhaps the most tangible is signalization improvements, where you have a signal timed at Panel Street that's timed in synchronization with the Ann and Alpine signal. So we've made advisory comments to the city of Grand Rapids about that. Other options may be realigning Ann Street, and that would involve some land acquisition issues, potentially some environmental issues, but it is brought up in the document, at least at a conceptual level, that we want to look at if there's ways to make that alignment happen, if those come together before perhaps a signal change does. Of course, this crosses jurisdictional lines with Grand Rapids too. The slide showing some of those challenges that are in the document. So then we're moving into the third focus element, which is kind of the biggest one with the most moving parts. We're looking at, with Clute, at least in the near term, not being a connection point, and we're talking about removing it as what we call an essential connection point. What are some other connection options? So the 2 main ones that the Planning Commission zeroed in on, which this last year wasn't the first time these were brought up. There was a drawing put together 18, 19 years ago that had 7 or 8 different road alignments that could be used to connect from Bristol down to Walker Avenue. The Planning Commission focused in on these 2, option 1 and option 2. Again, we want to check into grading challenges, soil compaction, working with the various utilities in the area, especially in the case of option 1, where you work with, I think, a 48-inch water main that's along that alignment, and the proximity to the creek and the wetlands. There are certainly challenges here, but the idea is to just visualize how that road connection may happen in the future. These are all dotted lines; they're not solid lines. And even the Clute Street connection, if the pieces eventually come together, we certainly don't want to say that could not happen if people were still interested in that in the future. But we are removing it as an essential connection and looking at these other 2 options in the document. With the road alignment coming together the way that it's coming together with the Betts Industries expansion, those 2 kind of cartoon buildings you see on the left side of this image are buildings that are either constructed or being constructed, so this is real. But as those buildings are built and the road network grows up along them, around them. We want to see a sensible kind of access management strategy moving forward. So we advise in this plan that the industrial traffic within this site orients toward the center of the site out to that pending private road, which we had talked about potentially being a public road at one point from the Betts property. But just making sure that that traffic diverts into that road network rather than having a bunch of driveways on Walker Avenue, which would really disrupt the quality of life for some of the neighboring properties there. And then kind of the culmination of all this is we are revisiting the future land use map. By and large, we did not focus on any area outside of the focus element 3 in terms of future land use. And even then, we are just looking at, rather than just painting this with a broad brush and calling it industrial, we do want to see this continue to be developed as a PUD site or a comprehensively planned industrial site. So similar to what we labeled the properties on the southern section of that sub area we talked about 2 weeks ago with Northridge Drive, we're calling this a light industrial PUD, which is consistent with the type of growth that Betts has indicated they want to see on that site. A couple of other reference points on this image. These aren't hard recommendations that are going to show up on a future land use map that developers have to adhere to, but they're just reference points, kind of like we had the Dash Street network on the Northridge West sub-area plan. I want to show the proposed access network on this Betts Industries site, showing how that street alignment might come together with dashed lines on the kind of the left side of your screen there, as well as show kind of the proximity to Indian Mill Creek, showing that we want to be sensitive to areas within especially 500 feet of that creek in terms of where you focus your stormwater treatment efforts and where the site isn't contaminated or there's an ability to work with the earth and do landscaping in certain areas. You might start to kind of have stormwater treatment in the areas most sensitive and close to that kind of the bottom of the watershed there. So just a couple of additional reference points on that future land use map. So I will talk through the recommendations point by point. I won't talk through the findings that back those up or the implementation steps. That's a lot of detail we don't need to get into, but this is just kind of showing that this document dives pretty deep into some implementation steps related to this area that maybe weren't focused in on with the 98 master plan. But as far as recommendations, we proceed with pursuing the at-grade crossing at the Walker Avenue Railroad Bridge. With focus element 2, we've recommended the advisory recommendation of the City of Grand Rapids to consider coordinated signals at Ann and Panel. With focus element 3, continuing to look at those 2 options for a new road alignment between Bristol and Walker. Exploring options for improving the railroad crossing at Bristol without allowing northbound truck traffic, and then pursuing the light industrial planned unit development future land use on what we call the Trick Pit site, which is now being redeveloped by Betts Industries. So those are kind of the broad recommendations, and again, there's more specific implementation steps as individual sites plug into this plan. And that sums it up.
All right, thank you, Dan. Any questions for Dan on this? It's kind of a encapsulation of what the work we've been doing over the last couple of years.
I do have one. Can we go back to the master plan map there? Yeah, right here. The one thing that I'm seeing on the south border that we share with Grand Rapids on Dunlap Street, that should be medium density residential, should it not? The frontage there, because that road it's that incredibly steep street that faces into West Catholic.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that may have been a mapping error, or there may be, for whatever reason, there may have been a past industrial history there, but I'm guessing you're right. I'm guessing that was just a map boundary that we should clean up. So I think that's kind of amendment that we want to hear about.
Yeah, and also just on Roger Street down right by Panel as well. I think that is all housing. I know it's adjacent to the railroad, and behind there's some industrial use, but I think on that street itself it was all housing.
Yeah, and that's close enough to the scope of this project that I think we can take a look at that too.
Yeah, I don't think those are substantive changes that would hold this up. I think those are just changes that need to be made on the map. But I don't think it holds up the process for us moving forward today.
Okay. Yeah, we'll take a look at that. Now, if you get on the dead end of Cogswell, that's where you transition into, you're going into some of those Panel Street
Right.
industrial businesses. But yeah, Jason to Roger, I'll certainly look at that.
Yeah, that was my thought.
Thanks, Steve. Any other comments? Scott, you have any?
No, pure planning exercise.
Okay, all right, very good. What we have before us is the opportunity to move this on to the next step. Now, this goes to the City Commission? Okay, this is a recommendation to the City Commission. And it's a matter of recommending as submitted, recommending with notations, and perhaps a couple that Steve just made would be consideration of notations, or stop the presses and take a step back. Hopefully it's one of the first two rather than the last one. So do we have a motion?
Yeah, we can do that. And I do just want to say while I search this for the, oh, do we just have to say, Dan, we don't have to read the resolution.
There is a public hearing there.
I was trying to remember.
Yep,
Oh, well, I'll make a motion to open the public hearing.
okay, that's very good.
Second.
We have a motion supported to open the public hearing. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. We'll take public comment on the master plan sub-area plan.
David Mast, Andy Mast Greenhouse, business located at 1534 Panel. On previous master plans, it showed a corner where we park all of our trucks as being used by the city to put the road through in the corner of Panel and Bristol on the southeast corner of Bristol. That's been my main concern all along, that that corner gets taken away from me. Is that going to be taken off of this master planning?
Can feel that. There's no graphic in this plan document that shows a right-of-way being.
I don't see that, but I mean, I don't want to have it creep back in either if I don't say something.
Yeah, that's a fair question. No, this shows two potential alignments all on the dead end of Clute Street for that connection to go through, except that, to your point, there is this option 2 that shows that could extend all the way out to where Panel connects to Bristol. But again, I'm not sure what the eventual road design would look like there. But it seems that the recommendation from public comments and from the Planning Commission was that would be more of a straight shot as opposed to a curve around. I think the idea originally was that for that to be a curve around that would clip off that corner of Mast Greenhouse that then connects to Clute, and that's been taken off this plan.
Okay, thank you. Then next comment is, I do have a concern, and from what I understand, looking at the plan that you're talking about, working with the city of Grand Rapids to put a light on Panel and coordinate that with the light on Ann Street. I'm glad to hear that because I think that's a lot of the traffic problems that we've had. But if we I know in the past Grand Rapids has not really wanted to put that light in. If they don't and the road does go through option 2, for example, that's going to make that traffic a lot worse. Grand Rapids have to put a light in anyway. So they might as well do that and see if that happens first. And then the third point is I don't see an option number 3, which is do nothing and completely scrap this plan. And I was wondering if that was a consideration that you guys had considered at this point in time, because from my understanding, most people in the valley there aren't really interested in the road going through.
Well, I guess I'll put it in a way that
Maybe I'm speaking out of turn for most people, but that's my impression that most people and neighbors aren't really interested in this road.
Because from a road perspective, option number 3 to do nothing is kind of what we have, because these are very, very expensive, very difficult projects. They're really long range options, so there's not going to be any immediate impact.
understand that, but if option 3 would take that long-range expense off the board. Never have to spend it if you took it off the master plan. That sounds cheaper to me. Thanks, guys.
Take another crack. So I think another aspect of that is that none of these options are firm requirements that we're putting in as implementation action items that we have to pursue, just things to consider for future potential connections. And I think the Planning Commission was not interested in ruling out a eventual connection, so that's why we put these dash lines in as possible connections.
Well, I'd offer the comment as well, just going through this process, that what's driving this is there's seems to be a commonly recognized issue of safety involved panel at Alpine, and that's the only public street connection to get to the interstate. So we were looking at how that could be improved at that current connector and what the prospect would be to move it to the west in order to provide access to the interstate by way of Walker. So it is, as Scott mentioned, it's a longer range view, but we'd be remiss if we didn't take a look at that and make plans for it as to how it might happen. A lot of things have to fall into place, but at least we'd have a plan in hand to follow in order to address that. Given our past success as far as working something out between Grand Rapids and Walker at Alpine, we've got to look at the other direction and see how, if it could be accomplished there, where it's more in the control of Walker rather than having to negotiate with the community next door.
The other thing that we have to see how it's going to work out is this Betts driveway out to Walker. If that alleviates a lot of the traffic, then option 1 and 2 turn into option 3. We just don't do anything, because the road that Betts put in solved the issue. Solved more of the issue, not the whole thing.
Okay, any other public comment?
I'm Mike Rinsma from Rinsma Greenhouse on Panel Road 1512. You guys had talked about straightening out Ann Street and going across Alpine right there. Is that through the Baker Auto Parts? Was that one of your options when you said straighten that out, or?
Not sure if we know exactly which properties it would impact. It might wrap around the site just to the south of Baker, the way that it's shown there, but it's very, very conceptual. So
The reason I say that is it appears they've already started a construction project on that site. And I'm just wondering if I think it'd be a good idea, but did we just let it slip through our hands at this point?
It's a good question. I know that actually was something that was brought up as part of the Baker/Weller review. There was some comments, this was back maybe 2 years ago now. How do you get over that part of their site? And this might have been before they applied, but there was some talk about getting up over that railroad bed grade and all the grading challenges that would go with that. So that would be a difficult connection to make, and I'm not sure if it would be right on the line of Baker or with the two car lot properties to the south. I know it was brought up, and it's, again, very hypothetical, and a lot of issues would have to be resolved to get over that ledge from a grading standpoint. But yeah, the Weller Auto site is moving ahead, and so there's going to be some activity and some use of that property for what they're doing there.
Thank you.
Any other comment? There being none, entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I make a motion to close.
Support.
We got a motion and support to close the public hearing. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Okay, now we deliberate and decide on an action.
Well, what I'll say is that, you know, looking through this plan and thinking about all the work that we've done, it really does, you can see the culmination of all the things that all the steps we've taken and all the difficult conversations we've had over the shape of this. And I'm very happy with what we've come to. I think we've taken a lot of input, and I think we see a lot of that there. And I am more than happy to make a motion in favor. But Dan, procedurally, with this being a resolution, do we simply note that we're making a positive recommendation, or do we have to read the resolution?
You can note that you're making a positive recommendation. Just refer to the resolution.
Yep. If any others have comments before? Great. Well, I'll make a positive recommendation on resolution number 19-4.
Support. Got motion and support. Got motion and support for positive recommendation from the Planning Commission to the City Commission with respect to subplan area number 5. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you very much. Thanks, Dan. Next case is case number 18-815, Falk America. It's Walkerview lot number I-9, 1900 Northridge Drive Northwest. It's a final area site plan request. This was approved. There was an approval on this project back in November of 2018. They are now looking at some substantial changes to that prior approval. So it comes back to the Planning Commission for action. This likewise is a public hearing. And again, we'll start off with Dan, the Planning Director, providing an introduction.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to excuse myself from this one.
Okay. Thank you, Jason.
All right, thank you. So kind of history repeats itself because we had the Richmond Farms case and the Falk case on the same date 4 months ago, and here we are again, or 3 months ago. Here we are again. So I'll jump right into it. Just to reorient you to the site, this is that 25-acre L-shaped lot that's being proposed for development by the metal fabricators, Falk North America, NLBV, I think is their full title. I'll jump right into the set of changes from a layout standpoint. Often with PUD projects, or any site plan really, there may be subtle design tweaks that we can review and consider administratively. But when you get to the point where you're talking about reconfiguring your driveways, moving parking around, shifting the layout of the building substantially, then that gets to a point where we really need to have the Planning Commission weigh in. So I'm showing the two plans side by side here. From a really high level, the most stark contrast here is that you see there's the single driveway on the east edge of the site and an expansion of the paved surface in front of the building in comparison to what was originally proposed and approved. And I'll get into some more details, and I might not have picked up on everything, but should be most of the issues here. So in the front of the site, on the side of the site, on the west side, you're picking up a couple of employee spaces. In exchange, you're losing all your striped parking in the front, so that's jumping down to bullet point 4 there. You're widening the pavement substantially. There's a reduction in the rear yard setback, so the building's shifting a little bit farther back. There's a combination of building in phases 1 and 2, and that's probably a good thing from a process standpoint. I think we weren't quite sure how much of this would get done, how quickly, and now we know there's going to be more building construction up front. Then you're talking about a overall slight reduction in the building footprint, getting down to 0.5 there. The removal of designated trailer parking spaces, and I understand that's because they're proposing to move the parking inside the building for trailers to load and unload. So again, I think that's a positive improvement. Consolidation of the 2 driveways to 1 and the widening of the driveway, that's a point that we are asking for some commentary on. And there's a city standard that we have a cap on driveway width, and I'm sure Scott will speak on this, but to veer from that width I don't think is very common, and to do so is really what we'd review as more of a variance item. So if you're going beyond 36 feet wide on a commercial or industrial driveway, you have to have a set of justifications based on variance criteria. If you've ever been involved with the ZBA, it's kind of a similar process where you have 4 findings that you need to make a case for to expand or to change your driveway in conflict with the ordinance. So that case really should be made for this driveway, or it should be reduced down to the 36-foot maximum. And then there's a reduction in the overall total amount of outdoor storage area from 176,000 square feet to a little under 170,000. So it's still quite a large expanse of outdoor storage area. Related to the paved surface, I'm asking, and this doesn't show up on my graphic comments here, but let's make sure the original landscaping plan as approved is adhered to, because we're talking about a lot of paved surface where you're having a lot of stormwater runoff, heating up of the site, where shade trees can have an impact and can help capture some of that stormwater. And then getting into more of an architectural standpoint, the landscaping should still be used to the extent that it was originally proposed in the front of the building, where you have sort of a different look on the front side to kind of help screen that. So that leads us into more of a set of architectural comments. The proposed facades have changed. On the back side, you have what I consider to be a very compliant architectural facade here. You have a lot of glass and a pretty interesting look to the building in comparison with what was proposed before. On the front side, not so much. You have the office areas have gone away, so there's no more office entry in the front because the entire circulation of truck traffic through the building has changed, which is something I didn't really go over on my layout slide, but that's really the justification for this whole change is the movement of trucks kind of from the north to the south end of the building. And the office area is really more on, I think, the southwest corner of the building now. I'll ask the applicant to clarify that, but so you really don't have an office proposed in the front of the building now, and that lends itself to not having that articulated entryway and not having that kind of strong announcement of the building from the public view on Northridge Drive. So it kind of diminishes the aesthetics on Northridge Drive, where we're trying to dress those up. We've asked that of other sites that have, at least where the frontage is up close to the right-of-way, you want to have a defined base and a defined top, some different treatments on those buildings. And I think their last plan showed that a lot better, at least on the Northridge side, than this one does, although they did add some glass on the bottom of the building that you see in that slide there. So I defined some of those gaps. I talk about having ways to remedy this if they make a strong case for the building having to be this way, where there's the circulation from north to south. At least put some different colors, some different textures near the corners at the top and bottom of the building, different ways to kind of announce that. And again, ornamental trees and other landscaping along that frontage can help to break that up as well. Kind of rule out the need for an office near the front. It's nice to have that office as kind of the main entry near the front, so I'd like to have the applicant make their case for why that got relocated. And then signage is another issue. The kind of sign package that's proposed has changed. I'm doing my best with this drawing here to scale up based on, I think there's some metric measurements on that architectural drawing, this being coming from the Netherlands. And literally every other nation on the planet uses metric. So we're trying to do our conversion here to the standard system. And so doing my best to scale this up. I believe this is around 275 square feet of signage with just the labels, and then the logo is an additional amount of signage. I'd like us to stick to, there actually is an approved sign package for the Walker View project, and the past plan we looked at stuck to those metrics, so you can have 1-to-1 square foot to linear foot of wall frontage on I-96, 1-to-1 on Northridge Drive even, but as it is here, you have a lot more than would be permitted on the I-96 side. So I'd like to see this overall reduced to that 226 feet, which is the length of the building at the time of the full build out, which is still really generous in comparison with the code that we have, which maxes out at 120. So I'd like to see this all shrunk down to that 226 based on the 1-to-1 lineal feet to square feet. The catch here is that I think the icon of this business is really unique and kind of adds to the character of the building. So I think the Falcon in this case, we can use a kind of a liberal sign measurement approach and just kind of, it's a CAD term, but you kind of polygon just the parts of the sign that are lit up. So the hawk itself, the dark parts of the hawk would count towards the square footage, but not the overall square around it. So that might be a certain amount of square footage, and then the logo or the label should probably shrink down so that all falls within the 226. So a lot of recommendations here, but this is copying and pasting from the last report in a lot of ways because we don't have our final plan submitted yet. So bear with me if you've read through those. It's still kind of a long list, but a lot of that is procedural items that we're expecting with the final plan submittal. But what I'd really like some focus on is the driveway layout aspect, kind of justification for all the pavement that's proposed, and some architectural edits subject to what you're comfortable with for architecture on that facade in combination with landscaping. Those are the main issues that have really changed since the last time. So that's what I'd like you to focus on. Those are my recommendations, and I think there's some from the city engineer as well.
Thank you, Dan. Any questions of Dan?
I have one. Dan, on the front elevation, where they don't have doors, is there a statement that that's not a truck dock, but that's just an entrance and exit type thing? On the other doors, trucks parked in there. What's the ordinance talk about truck dock on the front? If it's not a truck dock, just say entry for interior.
Yeah, I haven't found anything specific for that in the ordinance, but that's a good question. I think all three of those doors on the front are proposed as through. You enter and then you exit out the south side. Although I'm looking at two doors on the south side here, so I think the applicant could better clarify what the circulation is there, but I don't think that's primarily for parking and leaving it open.
Okay, thank you, Dan. And move over to Scott, city engineer.
Three quick notes here. I think Dan covered most everything, but you know, the driveway width, we have a 30-foot maximum driveway width that we can increase to 36 if the applicant stripes it for 3 lanes. We know that's a little bit of a camouflage to just allow 2 trucks to be able to get through there as well. So we're pretty loose with that, but when we get over 36, we kind of tighten up a little bit. Everybody comes in and wants to have a 50-foot driveway. And if everybody had a 50-foot driveway, it would be a little bit more chaotic with situations like this. And I think when you look at the aerial too, you can see there's a lot of driveway action in that one location. So we did send a note over to the applicant and said that we would like them to discuss a couple items related to that. One is that they've used a WB67 truck, which is just about the largest truck you can use. And now if that's needed to be able to move these panels around, then that's fair. We should discuss that, but then they should talk about the volume of truck traffic for that, and just get into some more detail to help with the justification. So we haven't seen that yet, but I see Justin's here, so he may have some information on that. Along with that, if that larger truck is used, the northwest and southwest corners of the building looked pretty tight to be able to get two-way truck traffic through there. I think the truck turning template plan showed two-way traffic, so we have to be cognizant of that. You know, if there's a bigger driveway needed, then there should be bigger space around those buildings to get vehicles safely around too, especially with a blind corner, because you can't see anybody else coming. And then lastly, the elimination of the truck parking is a little bit concerning. It's hard to go into a plan like this with all of this pavement and think there's not going to be any truck parking in the parking lot. So we'd feel better if there was an area located out there for that, because if it's not, it'll just happen wherever they want to put it. It could be frontage, could be, you know, highly visible, unshielded. So we'd like to have recommend that you talk about that as well. That's it.
Thanks, Scott. Any other questions for Scott? I guess piggyback on it, as the applicant comes forward, I think it'd be good to just show, it sounds like there's truck turning templates that have been used to explain how things are going. I'd like to see just how the traffic is anticipated to move through the property, because again, the amount of asphalt that's north of the building appears to be substantially more than the south side, and it sounds like the same trucks that are going in south side will be coming out the north and vice versa. So the better we understand that, maybe we'll better understand that traffic circulation as well as that driveway. If that's the case, if the applicant could come forward and speak to those questions and go from there.
Good evening, Justin Longstreth with Moore & Brugink. Dan, if I give you a plan, can you project it overhead? I was taking notes as staff was talking, so I hope I've caught everything. But what we're showing overhead here is the truck circulation plan, and if it's okay, I think I'm going to have to step away from the mic just to maybe to point to it. If you remember the first plan that we had two driveways, and we had a driveway that was located here kind of on the west side, which was going to be more of an enter only, and then we had a second driveway which I think was kind of in this neighborhood located between the two across the street, but that was going to be more of a primarily exit. And through a value engineering exercise by eliminating that westernmost driveway, we were able to significantly reduce the amount of site grading. So that's primarily the reason that we've gone from 2 to 1 now. So as far as site circulation goes, obviously everything is entering this drive. Primarily raw product, which comes in on, it's rolls of sheet steel, come in on a truck, circulate the site counterclockwise, and enter into the overhead doors on the south side of the building. That's where they'll drop the raw steel. The product moves through the building from south to north, and you go from the raw steel to the finished panel. Trucks then would enter back into the overhead doors on the north side of the building, pick up the sheet, the finished product, the sheet panels, and then exit the site out the same driveway. Eventually in the...
So they come from the north side of the building, go through the building and come out the back?
They will circulate around the driveway that we have on the west side of the building to get to the back doors. Not necessarily drive through the building to get. So they'll come in, drive around, and back in to those overhead doors. That's how they'll drop the product off. Separate trucks will come in and back into the overhead doors on the front side to pick up the finished product and leave. So primarily, that's how the site circulation is going to work.
So there's not any trucks driving through the building. It's all sort of everyone's backing into their respective zone.
I think they have the ability to, but I don't know that that's going to be the primary circulation pattern that's desired. I think they have the ability to, but it's not going to be the primary circulation.
So the entry into the building from the south, they're going to be backing in there as well?
Mm-hmm. As I understand it, yes, they'll back into those overhead doors.
Okay.
Load the product on and then drive out.
I guess I'm wondering why it's the pavement that you have north of the building looks like it's probably necessary for that turning movement. It seems like you'd have to have a similar area to accommodate the entry and backing in on the south side.
I think part of it is just how the trucks are coming around and then the angle that they're at as they run around the south side of the building. They're already kind of pointed in the right direction. We wanted to give them a little bit more on the front just because of the proximity to the drive and how they were gonna be coming in on that side of the building.
Yeah, I can kind of see how the angling works with how they're trying to get in there. I mean, all around it kind of seems like an odd configuration to me. And how do you, I guess if we're talking about pavement, how are we justifying it seems like there's a lot to would be the east before you get to the outdoor storage area. There's a big open space, and I don't know what is the purpose for that being laid out that way versus compressing the site a little bit.
Sure. So not necessarily with the first phase, because the first phase, they're gonna have enough capacity inside the building to do all of the loading on the inside. But as additional lines are brought online here and the phase 3 building becomes online and available, they're looking for more room outside exterior to load trucks. And so that's why we've got a little bit of extra pavement on that east side, is to provide a loading space in the future.
At full capacity, how many trucks do they anticipate coming in and out of that site?
You know how many per day?
So it doesn't go per day, it goes per ship.
Okay.
Meaning, like one building they're shipping, so on a given day, it could be 10 trucks, 25, and then they could go a week without it.
Okay, so yeah, it goes based on order. So if they've got a big order, they're gonna construct that product, ship that product out, and then they could go a couple days without any trucks entering or exiting the site, depending on where the orders fall.
One question. When Dan was presenting this, he talked about these, whatever that term was, mega truck or something, these big, large semi-types. These turning templates are based on that?
So the truck turning templates that you see here are based on the largest semi that you would see on the road, to a 53-foot trailer.
Okay.
Now, with that being said, and this kind of gets into the justification for the wider driveway, I should back up. Primarily, the panel lengths that they produce are between 20 and 35 feet. So you think of a building height, and they're tipping up from the foundation to the roof line. It could be anywhere up to 35 feet. Occasionally, they may make a roof panel that is longer than 35 feet. And I know it takes a permit from MDOT, but there are occasions where they're going to have a really long panel, and having that extra width on the driveway is going to help facilitate getting those panels off the site. Okay. The other justification or reason that we're asking for a little bit wider is just based on the site circulation, where previously we had trucks primarily entering on one drive and exiting on the other. The applicant's very concerned that they're going to have a truck queued to leave, a truck entering, and that there's not going to be enough room to make that movement work. Mm-hmm. So that's why we're asking for a little bit extra width, coupled with the fact that we could have an extra long truck.
I have a question.
Sure.
So the larger trucks carrying the larger panels, that's going to be only outgoing traffic. You're not going to have anyone coming in with those
That's
larger.
correct.
So that kind of makes sense to me for the way it's laid out.
The only product that comes in is just going to be, and you've seen them on the road, the steel that's in the big rolls. That's the product that enters.
And that's the stuff that'll be using the south end of the building.
That's
and then on
correct.
the north end is where you might need bigger trucks. And that makes sense to me for the larger pavement footprint there.
That's correct.
Question on the back of the building, it's all glass. Why not more glass on the front?
That's a good question. I know that in their facility in Holland, the front that faces the expressway in that facility is all glass, and so I think they tried to keep that facade the same between the two. I know that the original version of the building facade that was presented by the applicant did not have any glass up front. And in talking with staff, they did add the bay of windows, or the bank of windows on the front there.
Is it their perspective that the front of the building is kind of their signage on the expressway?
In their mind, the expressway side is their front door, not Northridge. So it's a good point. point. So in phase 3, what is going to end up happening, and so one other thing. The office in the previous plan was up front, so it was up on the north side. Now the office temporarily is in this location. When phase 3 is constructed, the office is going to move back up to the front. So they didn't want to build an office up front, expand, and then have to remodel their office. And so eventually what's going to end up happening is that office is going to move up kind of what would be in that northeast corner, and that's going to end up being the permanent office when the future phase is constructed.
And we don't have a look at that yet, but I guess at that point we would have the ability to say, hey, let's see some glass at that point or whatever.
Yes.
The question came up about truck storage, as far as how many trucks or trailers are going to be sitting on this site waiting to be loaded. Is there a location for these trucks?
I think what would end up happening is they would be eventually kind of loaded on that east side in that area. They don't have trucks that are going to be sitting for long periods of time. They're going to have product that is produced, is sitting out to be loaded, and then it's loaded like that next day. So it's not going to be a parking lot of trucks just sitting waiting. But when they are queued to be loaded, they will be on that east side of the building.
What's all the outside storage going to be used for? That whole 4 acres or so?
Finished product. It's just going to be finished product that's just waiting to be loaded onto trucks.
But I thought the finished product's coming out of the plant.
It is coming out of the plant, I think.
And the truck's going to drop it off on the outside storage?
What-
Come
what-
back and get it, or what?
What they'll probably do is move it to the outdoor storage with high-lows until such time it could be loaded onto a truck. So when they really start getting into production, and there's a lot of panels coming off the line and they can't just put them right onto a truck, they'll go out into that area from the building using a high-low to be stored until it can then be put onto a truck. But again, that's going to be a phase 2, phase 3 thing when the product's really coming off the line.
So would that loading and unloading, like say loading of those panels be exclusive of that storage area, or would it be within the storage area?
I think it could probably be within that storage area.
One of the points that Scott raised in his review was the blind corners on the building. Can you speak to how that is or is not going to be an issue?
I think primarily it's not going to be an issue because any of the trucks using or circulating around that northwest and southwest corners are primarily going to be going one way. The drive aisle is wide enough for two-way traffic, but primarily the trucks swinging around that are going to go one way.
Scott, do you have any perspective on that?
I think they'll go two ways. I mean, when you look at the truck turning templates and the movements, and is it Pentine that'll be dropped off, there's gonna be a lot of stuff going on out there. If they need a 40-foot driveway, it almost seems like you need a close to 40-foot drive aisle, at least on those corners, to be able to get safely around there with even less visibility. Ultimately, it's what are you comfortable, in trusting that they're gonna operate that way.
So I think the good thing about how the pavement's laid out is, especially as you make that corner entering what I would say the northwest corner, it is wider. So if I'm a truck driver and I'm cheated more towards the north side of that, I've got a lot of space between myself and the corner of the building where I can sneak out and see around that corner. I think it would be a different story if we had a 26-foot drive aisle on the north side of the building turning to a 26-foot drive aisle on the west side, but because we are wider up front, I think there's ways that they can see around that corner and maneuver around that corner where it's not necessarily as tight.
Okay, we focused a lot on what's the movement is interior to the site. But as this traffic comes into, and probably coming into, you're looking at relatively smaller vehicles, perhaps. But it sounds like the ones that are exiting are going to be the larger vehicles. They're all going to have to go to the west in order to catch the interstate. They can't go back to Bristol. How does that work out as far as how it relates to the driveways across the street? And as they come out into the street, it's especially the longer ones, it's probably going to be a big swing out there. How do you account for that?
I would say that the swing, I mean, with the exception of maybe the really long panel, the swing of the truck is going to work just like any other industrial. We've got a 36-foot wide road out front, and especially because we are turning west with the trucks, they're going to be able to utilize all the way out into that far lane. So it gives them a fairly wide road section to swing out into. I should point out, one of the things that we did do as far as our geometric design on the driveway is really shrink down that radius for the eastbound turning traffic to really discourage trucks from making that turning movement. And I know staff had a comment about adding a sign. We've got one on our site plan, just signing that no trucks to turn right out of that driveway.
And this may be getting into the weeds a little bit, but in terms of your knowledge of the business, are there going to be peak times where you're going to expect that these large trucks loaded with the finished product are going off the site and going through the development? Any sense of that?
I don't know that they necessarily are loading trucks all at 9 o'clock in the morning and that you've got 25 trucks leaving within an hour. I don't think that's the case. Then it worked one shift, right?
So they ship on one shift, and then what happens is they load, and they would be staggered by each truck being loaded as they're
Okay. So they only load on one shift, so they'll only load, on like a first shift, and just the trucks are going to leave as they get loaded and come out. So there's not going to be a long queue of trucks waiting to leave the site. It's just as they get loaded, they'll leave.
Okay. All right. We've got this is a public hearing, so we'll take a break here and take a motion to open the public hearing.
Make motion. Support.
Motion supported to open the public hearing. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Do we have any public comment?
Good evening, Jeff Edwards with Rockford Construction. I'm here representing RDG Walker, the current owner of the building. I'm mostly just here to offer support or field any questions that might be related to how we're working together and the history we've had on the site. But in terms of the purchase and those discussions, things are going well. We're making progress. So I think to this point we've provided all the easements and other agreements that would be needed to facilitate the approval. But obviously if there's something outstanding, please let us know and we'll get that buttoned up for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
Support.
Got motion and support to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. It sounds like I'm getting a better sense of how the traffic's moving through the site. And perhaps it gave more perspective, maybe even for staff too, as far as the comings and goings. There's a lot to take in.
How many employees do you expect for this building to employ?
So with this first phase, they're looking at 7 employees. It's a highly automated process.
The reason I asked is just because I'm looking at this truck route around the building, just everything circling it, and just thinking about the employees. I mean, if you think about a job site, you try to take the truck traffic and move it away from any, car traffic coming in and out, and it doesn't seem like that's taken into account on this one.
So I would agree with that on an interim basis because of where the office is kind of located at this point. At full build out, I think you're going to see more of a traditional site layout where the office is brought up front. The employees and visitors are going to have kind of that access to it right out of the driveway as opposed to having to mingle with the trucks. So I think with future phases, we will get to that separation that we look for. Just on this interim basis and how they have it laid out, I would agree that we're going to have a little bit of conflict there.
Because we've talked about the big trucks. They're going to pull in this driveway and either pull in straight and back into those 2 front dock doors. And you're going to it's going to be completely people coming in and out. No?
So I think what's going to end up happening is the trucks entering, whether they're bringing raw product or they're
I'm talking about the finished good trucks.
Both. I think as they enter, they're going to immediately turn right into that front pavement area, and then it's just a matter of whether they circle around or if they back into those front doors. Employees, they really are not going to have any need to make that right-hand turn. They're going to be able to go straight to the parking spaces that we've provided in front of the office. So I think that helps keep them at least separated in the interim.
Well, I just see the one truck coming in here, on the east side there. Looks like he's pulling in, and then he's going to back in. So he's like he's going towards, but
the trucks that we have shown up front are really showing just how they're exiting and making a right-hand turn out of the building. What's not really shown is how that truck is going to maneuver and back in. That's not shown, but.
Unrelated to that, how do you feel about the signage stuff that we talked about?
I think that they would obviously prefer the larger sign size, but I don't have a real good sense of how 226 square feet would look. I don't know that that's an issue that we are going to completely push back on, but I know that they are interested in kind of having that bigger presence out on the expressway too. So.
Something. Here's what I did. I took that image. I saw the overall building height at 43 feet. I did some CAD geek math and scaled it in CAD. So my measurements may not be completely accurate, but I want to make sure we get accurate measurements from the developer. And I think if you look at a comparable development, the Meyer and Standale is a good example of what a sign looks like when it's probably too big. You have 2 enormous Meyer signs, and kind of in retrospect probably want to stick closer to a 1-to-1, but that's probably closer to a 2-to-1 square footage to wall length. So just to put things into perspective, and of course with our current sign ordinance, we only allow up to 120 square feet of signage for even buildings really enormously sized. So just putting things into perspective, I'd like to get a scale drawing with our units showing this facade and how big the sign is. But I'd prefer to see I completely support the logo. I think from an aesthetic standpoint, the label is a little bigger than we'd want to see in a development like this.
Well, let's try to break this down into pieces here. First of all, we talked about the signage. They've got something that appears to be over and above what we would standardly review or approve on a standard basis. Are we comfortable with what they've submitted, or more inclined? Dan has mentioned an altered at more than 1-to-1 ratio. and also fine tuning how he captures the sign area associated with the logo.
Just to be clear, this 275 that you figured, is that just the signage and not the Falcon?
Right.
Okay, and that's, what's that ratio to the building facade?
That's still less than 1.5 to 1, because I think, and I don't know exactly how big the Falcon is, so I don't know, but 275 to 226
But if we
is.
discount the Falcon for right now, just look at the word fault and that underneath, that's about 1.5 to 1.
Yeah, even less than that. It might be 1 1/3.
And what was minor? I mean, I know that that's not what.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the biggest sign, wall sign I can think of. The Alpine Meyer is a lot smaller, but the Standelmeyer has those two very large Meyer signs. I cannot recall off the top of my head.
Is
But
that
probably
1.5 to 1? Or?
I think maybe 1.5 or 2 to 1.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, my only thought on this whole proportion thing, and I agree with Dan, as you look at this, when you're going down Wilson with traffic and you see that big Meyer, I think that's out of perspective, and that building's maybe 20 feet tall. This is 45, and you're only going to see it from the expressway. So I think that visual about how big that is from how many feet away, just thinking through it now, whether or not the 275 down to 226, whatever that reduction is of 5–10%, quick math or whatever, but I don't have a problem with this size, but I'd be open to anyone else's suggestion.
It just seems like a pretty easy one to get in compliance with, and I don't know, again, what we're looking at for the change, but I wouldn't have a problem writing off the logo itself if we could get the name down to the right size. So I don't know if that's a way we could get a little bit of compromise on our end. Because that's pretty interesting.
I'd look to the applicant. I know I'm making a recommendation here. They proposed something else, and I think we don't know exactly what they proposed until we get a dimension drawing. So we're kind of out on a limb here, but you might say the parameters that you'd be comfortable with, and if it's that you'd be comfortable with a Falcon as proposed and a label sign not to exceed a certain square footage, then that would be what you could put into the motion.
That sound like a good direction to take? Okay. The exterior elevation to Northridge.
Do you think they would be open? Not to interrupt, but just
go ahead.
I think you had suggested some intermittent colors. I don't know what they would like to do with that. Jason, if you have any input on that, without getting. I mean, they have it on the sides of the building. I think that adds some benefit to the aesthetics. I don't know what they think about the front.
I think we could alternate some colors on the front.
Just to break it up a little bit. It's 45 foot tall, all one color kind of thing.
Another alternative, and it may be in concert with that, is that it sounds like we're going to see something different on phase 3. Perhaps we maybe work with some colors on what the interim facade is, and as we get closer to phase 3, either have it come back to the planning commission or relegate that to staff to work with them to take into account that they're going to have an office finish on who knows how much of a percentage of that north wall.
Yeah, another thing you might consider is how the landscaping ties into this. You kind of look at the landscaping in some ways as a embellishment to the architecture. So it might just be about also rearranging how some of the plantings along Northridge are laid out in relation to the front of that building. So there's some flexibility we could probably work with the applicant on with those things.
Okay.
Is there any signage on the front of the building, on the Northridge?
There was before, but there's not now.
No monument sign, no street sign, no nothing?
Is there a monument sign? I don't recall.
I don't think we have a monument sign shown on the site plan, but
I didn't see one, I just was
they
wondering.
may come back and ask for one, but it would conform to the sign ordinance. It wouldn't be anything special there.
how about we do this? We take action on, an interim action on the facade that's at hand. And perhaps with the introduction of alternating colors, and that was part of the palette, I believe, on the initial plan that came through. And then have an understanding as they get to the detail on phase 3 that they either come back to the planning commission or go to staff. Okay.
I think that's fair.
All right. The driveway. Scott, looks for some feedback from you, given what they've described in terms of why they're looking for the wider. Do you need any more information, or do you have an opinion on that?
Really do. We sent them an email on Friday. Unfortunately, we didn't send it to Justin. We sent it to Alex. I'm not sure if Alex is still working on this or not.
He is. He was in Daytona for the weekend.
Okay.
So.
We don't feel terrible at all for him then. But we really need some more detail in terms of looking at this like a variance, laying out why this is special, laying out the volume of these trucks and the vehicles, and going down through, we call it 10A through 10D in the highway rules and regs. Number 10 or section 10 deals with variances. And it's just like going to the ZBA where you have to list what are the peculiar situations, and I'd still want to see that at staff level.
Yeah, looking at how this is going to work, they don't have a huge 50-foot radius on both. It's just one, and you're measuring the width at the tangent, right? The 40 feet.
At the throat.
46?
Yeah.
Oh, at the road.
At the throat. I'm sorry, I'm all plugged up here.
Okay.
I guess, my big concern was that justifying that big width and size here should somehow translate to the other two-way traffic areas on the site, and it really doesn't. So it's hard to justify, creating some great big huge driveway out front when you have similar cross-traffic friction on site that maybe isn't addressed as clearly.
So that aspect of this, we may be able to have it referred back to staff to make the final decision on accepting or not of that, if we'd be willing to relegate that to staff to do so. The landscaping, you had some commentary that they're proposing less landscaping than was in the original plan. We've got additional paved area here. Just get some feedback as a project representative. If we go back to the plant materials, the amount and type of the original plan.
We can do that.
Okay.
Yep, we can do that.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because I think since we have such a plain front, let's call it that, if we can hide it with some landscaping from the road, and it doesn't sound like it's a destination for anybody other than the truck drivers. That I'd rather shield the building than show it off.
Can do.
And are there any other pending issues if we looked at those that we just summarized?
Big ones in the report. To the owner's point, I will verify what we have turned in already pursuant to the final approvals. We might have some of this stuff in the folder already.
Well, following our discussion, I feel pretty comfortable with where we've landed on everything, assuming our staff feels comfortable handling the driveway issue. I know that's kind of complicated and murky. So are you guys comfortable there?
Yeah, I think technically it goes through the city engineer's office, but I like to get a lot of input if it's a site plan, because if everybody says, hey, back off, this is no big deal, then we can loosen up a little bit. If they're all saying, this is crazy, then that plays into it. I think what I'm seeing is, a little give and take here is not going to hurt.
Okay. So if you're good with that, then I'm happy to make a motion on this, because everything else I feel pretty comfortable with where we landed on it. If everyone else is good. Okay. Well, then I will make a motion for case 18-815 to approve the final area site plan set revision dated 2/12/2019 and supporting application material for the first phase of development, including a 133,300 square foot building and related site improvements at the lot located at 1920 Northridge Drive Northwest. Conditions of final area site plan amendment approval. The applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the planning director's letter dated 2/13/2019. The applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the city engineer's letter dated 2/13/2019. I'll add a note that for the signage issue, we are permitting the Falcon logo as proposed, but additional signage is not to exceed 226 square feet. Is that correct?
That sounds like the discussion, and if you're gonna state that, I will just ask that you remove .6 in the findings there, because I had some notes specific to the signage that I think you just covered, so you can scratch .6 there.
Okay, and we'll remove the corresponding notes in the planning director's letter. And also noting that we want to see some type of change to the facade to the facing Northridge, correct? But that is being delegated to staff as well. Findings of fact per section 94-2133G of the Walker zoning ordinance. The proposed development does conform to the city's sub-area 1 future land use plan. The proposed development is adequately served by public facilities and services such as highways, streets, police, and fire protection, drainage courses, water and sanitary sewer facilities, and refuse disposal. The location of the proposed uses and layout of the site are such that traffic to, from, and within the site will not be hazardous or inconvenient for the surrounding area. Any noise, odor, light, or other external effect from any source connected with the proposed use will not adversely affect adjacent and neighboring lands or uses. The proposed use will otherwise conform to applicable zoning ordinance requirements. The nature, size, density, location, or design of the proposed sign package, including signage along the south building facade, not to exceed total area of 226 square feet, subject to the changes that we proposed in the motion, is acceptable and complements the signage and architecture of nearby properties.
I have one question. Did your report refer to the landscaping, to the first thing?
Yeah.
We have to have that as a condition.
Right, yep, that's in the letter, yep.
I'll support.
We have a motion and support. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. We're now at a point for commissioner and staff update.
I'm being serious this time. We have a bit of a breather. I have no application submittals for the month of March as of right now, so we're gonna have it's really strange because February is usually your slow month, and we had a really crazy busy February. March seems to be reeling down, but we're gonna get into maybe a couple of work sessions. Frank and I want to get back into the sub-area plan called Gateways, which is dealing with the entire corridor of Remembrance Road from city limits on Leonard up to Talmadge Township, and encompassing kind of the areas of concern with the 3-mile M11 traffic management issues we've talked about in the last couple of years, as well as some of the neighborhoods that we're focusing on close to that area. So even the Richmond Farm site tonight may come up in that conversation. But that's one of the work sessions, and then we may have a topic about a couple of zoning ordinance amendments, but it should be a lighter, less formal agenda, at least for the first meeting in March and probably the second.
So we will have a first meeting of March 6th?
We still plan on having a March 6th work session, but it's probably just going to be you folks. I don't think we're going to invite, it's going to be pretty informal, so just bat around a few things.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe the calm before the storm, because we always get a lot in April. But who knows? Who knows what the economy's doing?
Okay. Anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
Got a motion to adjourn. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Okay. We're adjourned.
Thanks. Yeah.